Hospopreneurs. Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Hospopreneurs podcast. Today I'm welcoming JD Fitzgerald, who's got an awesome project that he's working on, really cool, and looking to develop that. So JD, welcome.
Thank you very much.
No worries at all. So let's get into it. But before I do sort of open up this project that you're working on, I actually want to start these episodes with something a little more exciting, and I want to ask you about any crazy bar stories that you've got.
Oh, crazy bar stories!
Because they're a lot of fun. Because hospitality workers see so many things.
We do definitely see a lot of different things, things that you don't get exposed to, I guess.
That's right.
And sometimes, literally, you don't get exposed to in most other situations. Yep. So, I've got a few little stories here and there, but I think the one that repeats over and over again, the funny ones, new people to cocktail bars when they start shaking drinks. And telling them to put any sort of carbonated drink in a shaker, because they explode. It's always it's akin to asking someone for a left-handed bar spoon, or go and get a bucket of steam, that sort of stuff. That almost hazing level of question.
That's great.
I think my favorite crazy story was working at a nightclub when I was working. Watching someone over the bar, just seeing them out of the corner of my eye and having them stay there for ages. And then all of a sudden try and get up and go somewhere, and they'd obviously taken a lot of drugs. And it became very evident that it was ketamine, and they'd fallen into a K-hole. And they were only walking with one leg, so they weren't really going anywhere. And they were holding on to whatever they could find.
And just watching this dude is just hilarious.
It was amazing because I had to keep a straight face for the customers that I was serving in front of me, but watching this guy out of the corner of my eye just gave me this big grin. It was a highlight of my night.
That's awesome.
I watched him for about 2 minutes before calling security for
it. I'm just going to draw out my entertainment.
I know I should have called earlier, but this was just way too funny.
Love it. Cool. Thanks for sharing that with us, JD.
Yeah, no worries.
The thing. So you're working at a new place called Ether.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the new joint?
Okay, so Ether's over in Milton. It's just down there.
This is in Brisbane, so where is in Brisbane? Yep.
So Milton Station is literally just a door away from us. So it's at 35 Railway Terrace over in Milton. New craft beer bar owned by Jimmy Young and Dave Ward. Dave is the head brewer, or the master brewer, and he's studying at the moment for his Master Distillers and Brewers course. So he's got a lot of heavy study that he's doing alongside the brewing. It started probably 3 or 4 years ago with Jimmy and Dave while they were still working together. Jimmy's an electrical engineer originally, and Dave's a mechanical engineer. And those guys worked really long and hard.
We know engineers love their beer.
That's it.
Yep.
Engineers definitely love their beer. I saw something recently about which school drinks the most, and they went around and did a random survey, and apparently the medicine medicine drinks the most, or the opinion is that the medicine students drink the most. So that was common.
That's interesting, because I always thought of engineers as the real partiers.
Absolutely. I worked
back the tinnies.
Yeah, I worked an engineers ball for UQ actually, about 2.5 years ago, and that was insane. Just insane.
I've heard of some pretty crazy things at these parties.
The amount of drinking that went on in that room over the 2 hours that I was there was astounding.
Oh, gee. Something that I wanted to ask, because you're at Ether, in a brewery there, is that, like, last episode we sort of talked a little bit about whiskey. Can you tell us a little bit about beer?
Yes, within my limited scope, I can definitely tell you a bit about beer. In the last episode that I had listened to with Alex that you had on, he referred to whiskey as a basic beer or a baby beer, which is very, very true, because it's essentially the same starting elements minus the hops, and the hops are what give it the different flavors, or it's part of what gives them different flavors. So hop flowers come in huge varieties, and there's just more and more coming out.
So hops is a flower?
It is. It's a flower. It's actually in the same family as marijuana.
Right.
And when you get fresh hop flowers, you can definitely tell. It's that very very dank, almost sweet smell.
Yeah. That dank kush smell.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible that the similarity.
Wow.
And
it's like nah. That's just my hops.
It's my
That's just
hop
my
farm.
Hops.
Yeah, hydroponic hops.
That's right.
So
love it.
We up until recently had a beer on called the Wet Hop Ella, which was a New England style of beer. So New England in America, I think, is on the West Coast. I think it was a West Coast style of beer from America. And the difference with that is they use fresh hop flowers and they introduce it after they've gone through the boil and the mash in the fermenter, which gives it a very light floral and fruity taste.
Can we talk a little more about that actual process as well? Because
yeah,
Alex brought up a few things that might have been a little bit complex for some listeners.
Yeah.
And I'd like to. So even you talked about fermenting there. We sort of touched on that.
Yeah.
But just sort of to explain some of those terms and what they are and what the processes are that are involved in actually creating the beer.
Yeah, absolutely. So it all starts off as a malted grain, malt or grain.
So what is a malted
grain?
So a malted,
yeah. So a malted grain is when they start the germination process for essentially tricking the grain into thinking it's time to start growing. So in that, it starts to break down some of its starches into sugars. So once that's started, that initial malting is tricking it into growing and then stopping that growing process, essentially killing it. And once that's happened, it goes through a mill to make the malt a little bit smaller and easier to dissolve the sugars into the water they use in the boiler. So once it's been run through a mill, it goes into a boiler with hot water, boils off for a reasonable amount of time. That's I actually need to refresh on this stuff because I see it happen, but I never know all the terminology behind it. So mash first, and then it goes into a lauter tun, and in the lauter tun, as far as I know, because this hasn't been explained to me by Dave yet, who is our resident science nerd, it's transferred off into a separate container called the lauter tun, Lauter, and
lauter tun.
And then in that process, I believe that they try and get as much of the larger particles out of it. So they do that by creating a whirlpool inside using I believe it's a paddle in ours, which means that all of the particles clump at the base in the lauter tun.
So what clumps at the base?
So it'll be all of your larger,
like some sort of sediment.
Yeah, your larger sediment things like your all your malted grain. Occasionally, if they introduce hops in this early stage, usually creates a more bitter beer. So your IPA styles have an earlier hop introduction.
Indian Pale Ale. Yeah?
That's it.
Yep.
It's an Indian Pale Ale. They'll introduce hops earlier on, and they might do a later hop after.
And we had a bit of a chat the other day when I came in. I'd actually never tried a dark beer before.
Yeah.
Never. And so if we can just grab a quick little overview of the different types of beers and, what makes them distinctly different.
Absolutely. So I'll just finish off with that
process.
I'll just finish that process first, just so we go from raw ingredients to something that started to ferment. So once it's gone through that process in the lauter tun and the whirlpool, all of the clearer liquid, it's usually fairly milky at this stage because it's still got all of those sugars in it. That's then put into fermenting vats. So in that process of transferring from the lauter tun into fermenting vats, they actually introduce the yeast at that point. So your little
Is that strained in, or like how does that actually transfer?
They create a warm liquid. So to activate yeast, especially dried yeast, because you hardly ever find fresh yeast strains these days. I think it's called turbo yeast that most places use because it's the safest and doesn't produce any other toxins alongside what happens during fermentation. So they make a liquid out of this, and it's in a separate container. And as the baby beer is transferred from your lauter tun into your fermenting vats, the yeast is introduced then, so it's throughout the liquid. It's quite evenly dispersed rather than just sprinkling it on top and allowing gravity to do its work. It's within the actual mixture a lot better. Then your yeast goes through and eats all your fermentable sugars, and that spits out a little bit of CO2.
Spits out those bubbles.
It does indeed. Yeah. So those bubbles will normally dissipate during this stage of fermentation. So that's one byproduct. Your alcohol is another byproduct. There's a whole bunch of other smaller elements that come out during that are usually just not really worth mentioning because they don't do anything to the flavour of the beer. The yeast will definitely have a different flavour.
How does the yeast affect the flavour of the beer?
I actually don't know. It's something that I'm interested in. I've wanted to ask that question of Dave because he'd be the best person to ask.
Great.
To get a clear answer, because he'll know it from, there's Pilsner yeasts they use for Pilsners, they use for lagers or heavier styles of beer, which will have an effect on the mouthfeel of the beer and B, the flavour.
Can you describe what the mouthfeel actually is when people say the mouthfeel?
Yeah, so the mouthfeel is, if you think of a glass of water versus a glass of milk, the mouthfeel is what you're describing when you taste milk. So water is quite thin.
So the viscosity of the liquid.
Yeah, the viscosity is probably the easiest way of talking about it. But it's, people will ask, what's the mouthfeel? You can describe it in, it's chewy or it's fatty or it's, and this usually has something to do with the amount of residual sugar that's left over in the process. So the yeast might not eat all of the sugar,
right.
or might be might have been stopped for a specific purpose. So you want a sweeter style of beer, you can go through your fermentation. You can add sugar, or you can add some sort of carbohydrate that they will break down and eat to get a sweeter style of beer. But you stop the fermentation before they've eaten all of the sugar. So the same can be said of wines. That stage where it's going through that fermentation, you can use specific yeasts to eat only so much. And once the concentration of sugar in the liquid is below a certain amount, the yeast will die off on its own, or you can reduce the temperature, or both.
Cool. Thanks for that. There's I'd like to go into that next question. I interrupted you with before.
The different styles of beer. So I think the easiest way of looking at the different styles of beer is looking at the colour first. So starting at your very lighter colours. Things like lagers and pilsners are generally really light in colour. They tend to be fairly fresh and clean. Depending on the style of beer after that, it can change colour. So you get malty, or you can get hoppy beers. So the malty styles of beers are more affected by the malts that are used in the fermentation than they are of the hops that are introduced.
Okay.
So hops might not be the primary flavour that they're wanting. So they tend to use darker malts. There's things like chocolate malts, caramel malts that introduce specific flavours.
Right.
So the darker you go, they tend to be a lot lower in hop content, and they tend to have a lot more of a chewy mouthfeel. They're a lot more mouth-filling, except when it comes to stouts. Now, stouts and porters are the darker two at the very, very other end of the scale, and they use different styles of the malt at the time. So they will use a dried malt or a roasted malt. So the stouts tend to use a roasted malt, which gives you those coffee flavors, like coffee and dark chocolate.
And that's what I loved about that one that I had.
Yeah.
I think that was one of Ether's, wasn't it?
Yes, that was the
porter I had.
the Event Horizon Porter.
That was awesome.
Yeah,
it tasted
really,
like mint slice.
Yeah, so that was one flavor that not everyone picks up on, which I find interesting in and of itself. So the flavor and aroma compounds are obviously there in the beer, but not everybody picks up on them, which is something that I am hoping to do a little bit more research into for the project that I'm working on.
Yeah.
So that should be good.
I think let's actually talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about what it is that you're working on, what it's called, what you're going to be building.
Okay, so at the moment I'm working on a website called the Cocktail Refinery, and it's based around bartender training in the very early stages. So your very basic elements of how to pick up a bottle, how to hold a bottle, how to pour spirits from your bottles into jiggers and measure them properly in order to make a cocktail.
For those who aren't familiar, in another area of hospitality or out of the industry, a jigger is the container,
the little measuring container. And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. There's little plastic ones that are the ones that we're supposed to use. They're the only ones that are government approved. But you can also find essentially little graduated cups that are made of stainless steel that work really, really well when you have measurements outside of a 15 mil or 30 mil pour, which is handy. So it goes through all of that, understanding the equipment, knowing the names, knowing some of the very basic ideas, like balancing cocktails. And when we talk about balancing, it's usually we're usually talking about the sour and the sweet in a cocktail. So a lot of different cocktails do,
because a lot of bartenders talk about this. What is a balanced drink?
Yes,
I've heard
absolutely.
all sorts of different opinions on it, and even from people in the industry or in other areas of hospitality, talking about balancing a meal or a balanced,
balance is what
product.
We strive for most of the time,
and that's that nothing is too overpowered in the drink. Is that right?
Absolutely. So there is that stream of thinking, but when you're talking about balancing cocktails, it's a lot easier to look at it as what you want to be the hero of the drink. And usually that's the spirit, whether it be rum in a daiquiri, which is just rum, sugar and lime, or do you want what is it that you want to be?
The champion,
the champion of your drink. What are you trying to? Yeah, the voice of the drink.
That must be my music background.
Absolutely. It's I had a great way of from a distiller, from a cognac distiller, the way that he talked about what he does versus what we do in the bar, and he said, "Look, I make the instruments and you play the music," which was a really cool way of talking about a spirit producer.
That's great. I really
handing on their product to a bartender. And it really works because each bartender will use it differently, just in the same way you've got different styles of music.
That's awesome. But before that,
so right down from those skills all the way up to understanding the pH level and the acidity level of your produce. So understanding that your limes, each lime may have a slightly different pH level, and in order to get your balance and get that balance consistent, you need to make sure your product is the same every time. So Dave Arnold has written a book called... Oh God, the names escape me now. Anyway, Dave Arnold's the owner of Booker and Dax, or ex-owner of Booker and Dax. It's closed down now, unfortunately.
Where's that?
In New York. He is the head of research and technology over at the French Culinary Institute over in New York. So a very, very interesting man to read read into. He's done a lot of stuff on
Mm.
culinary science, and looking at why certain things work, why certain gels, things like agar-agar or gelatin, can be used in different ways, and how those can be used for cocktails as well. He does a lot of.
Because you're really interested in that sort of
I
side
am
of things, and
the science side of what we do in the bar is the way I think of it is the more knowledge you have, the better armed and the better prepared you are to be creative.
mm,
So it's the forerunner to creativity should be the grounding knowledge.
the sort of you're saying the technical
Yeah, the technical
knowledge
side.
or technical skills.
Absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. Having that gives, to me, would give you a better scope of creativity.
Interesting.
Um,
But so on the flip side, on creativity, people can know their medium,
Yep.
but not really apply that creative thinking.
Yep.
And then there are people who don't have the medium, but then apply creative thinking and they come up with other solutions.
Other solutions to
So
it.
it's really interesting thinking about that. And so you believe
absolutely.
that having that technical skill even does it enable someone to be creative, or
Not necessarily. I think having the technical skill allows for creativity that's already there to flourish a little bit more. I mean, not to say that you must have technical skill in order to be creative, because that's
with
just
that medium.
But with that specific medium, then yes, you definitely do need at least a small grounding in what you're doing.
I think it's because I think a lot about creativity. I talk a lot about creativity with my friends. It's something that actually I'd like to write a book on one day.
Yep.
On creativity, because I explore many different creative mediums, and everything from music and dance. I see even conversation as a creative medium, because it just unfolds, it evolves, it's evolutionary. So the way I think about it is, when we know a technical skill or medium better, it just gives us a reference point to just convey that to other people.
Yes, absolutely.
Who understand that medium.
It does.
Or can interpret that medium.
It does indeed. And trying to have that that base level of creativity and the technical skill, allowing you to convey it to somebody else, also means that you can avoid, if you understand it well enough, you can avoid using jargon. You can explain it. I think it was Einstein that said, if you can't explain it to a 3-year-old, then you don't know it well enough. So knowing it well enough to explain it to somebody that has no idea about any of the other stuff makes it really, really exciting. It's like trying to explain what yeast does. These tiny little monsters that eat sugar and they fart out CO2 and they wee out alcohol.
Cool.
So that's in a nutshell, that's what it does.
That makes sense. That's great. Great little chemical explanation.
Yeah.
Awesome. You mentioned there about training, about a website. And can you say the name of your business again?
So yeah, it's the Cocktail Refinery.
Cocktail Refinery.
So that's looking at your training. That should be coming up as at least a soft launch, with some of the information coming up in July.
Well, you've talked about the website, but you've got bigger plans for it. What are you imagining? Because this is what I want to explore, and why you want to do that.
Yeah, down the track, I'd really like to see to have a venue of my own. Something when most bartenders say, I want to have my own venue, they talk about having a small cocktail bar where they can do what they want. They can be their own boss. They can make their own money. Bartenders and anyone in hospitality that sticks around and ends up with their own business usually does it for the love, not for the money. And we generally do love what we do. My idea is, instead of
I think you have to in hospitality.
It's
such a difficult industry to not continue unless you love it.
My idea is not having my own venue in terms of a cocktail bar, although it will probably double as that, as a separate revenue stream. Is to have essentially a research and development lab for cocktail bartenders. Which is
really cool.
A space for bartenders to hang out and hire out in order to play with equipment and maybe chemicals and other things that they wouldn't normally get to play with in their own business. So there's a whole bunch of things like centrifuges and
This is all.
rotary evaporators that
I'm
have
not going to
been.
know what any of these things are, but
Well, so yeah, your centrifuge has been and the rotovap actually have been repurposed from other sciences
okay.
to do certain things for bartenders. So, in order to make clear liquids, you can put any sort of sample into a centrifuge, and it'll spin it really, 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 really fast. So any of the solids settle to the bottom, and what you can pour off or decant off is a clearer liquid that maintains the flavour but doesn't have the particles through it.
And so you said decant off. So what's that?
So it's essentially just pouring the clearer liquid off the sediment. You do the same thing with bottles of wine that have sat for a long time. They usually have a bit of sediment in the bottom. So when you see the decanters, which are the separate glass bottles they serve a dual purpose. One is aerating the wine, which introduces oxygen, opens the wine up, or use the term "open it up" because it helps the volatile aromatics come out of the wine, so it smells better.
Okay.
Different wines will.
Does it taste better as a result?
That's a difficult question.
I am going to be having a wine episode coming up very soon.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'll explore in that one. I might actually make note of that to explore that.
Absolutely.
So that's cool.
I think to draw it back to what I'm doing, the reason I say it's a difficult question is flavor and smell are so closely linked. When you there are only really 5 tastes that we can have without having a sense of smell. So we taste sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and umami. And umami is a really difficult one. It's a Japanese term for a savory flavor.
And that's really cool. It's come about a lot more. I think more recently.
Absolutely.
I think I was only introduced to the umami flavor maybe 5 years ago or so. I don't know when it's really exploded, but it's been really interesting learning about that.
It has been.
It tastes like chicken noodles.
Well, yeah, it's the easiest way of putting it is MSG.
Seaweed. Yeah, MSG.
MSG is umami.
Yeah.
And it helps flavors, and it's that very, very savory. Tomatoes produce umami flavors naturally. So that's why you find a lot of cooking that involves tomato and meat tend to taste better because you get the umami supporting the flavor of the meat.
Great.
Which comes from your Maillard reaction, which is a non-enzymatic browning of the meat, which is interaction of heat and proteins and sugars to caramelize on the outside.
Okay, so to caramelize. So you lost me a little bit there. I want to
explain
that a little bit more.
Yeah. So
did you say non-enzymatic?
Non-enzymatic browning. So the Maillard reaction is not done by enzymes. So little tiny beasts that
was the Maillard reaction.
The Maillard reaction. So Maillard, named after the scientists who discovered the property or the way it works. But you have enzymatic browning on the other side, which is what happens to herbs when you bruise them. So if you get mint and you crush the leaves and leave them to sit, oxygen will help the enzymes break it down, and it will turn brown. And that's where you get those bitter notes.
Right.
Trying to think of the name of the actual enzymes. It's written about in several books talking about
what sort of. Do you have a reference book for that sort of that concept?
I do. I'm just going to have to look it up. So
Find it. That's
keep
cool.
talking.
We'll keep talking.
While I'm doing it.
I wanted to. So I'm really glad that you've talked a little bit more about food as well, because obviously with my background in bars. A lot of the people that I've been speaking to have been spirits related or bar related. Yeah. I really want to explore even cafes, strip clubs even, the more periphery peripheral sides of hospitality as well.
Yeah.
So anything, even new products or things like that. So I'm really glad that you mentioned food because I think that when you're talking about this space as well, would you say it's just for bartenders?
The original vision was simply for bartenders.
Mm-hmm.
But having said that, through a lot of the research that I've been doing, what we do as bartenders is essentially what chefs do in the kitchen.
Mm.
The difference is we can keep tweaking, we can keep changing what we do as we're doing it, even after the guest has tasted whatever the product is. So you wouldn't have. It's usually a complaint when something's sent back to the kitchen, like a steak that's been undercooked or overcooked.
Mm.
That has to go back to the kitchen and be completely redone. Whereas for cocktail bartenders, we can make something, have a guest
Edit it.
have a guest test it, and then edit it towards whatever flavor they like.
Yeah.
Whether it needs to be more sweet or sour or bitter or a little bit more salt added.
So that brings up this idea of balanced again.
Yeah.
So is balanced, subjective? Is a balanced drink subjective?
I'd like to hope not, because
So
that would
perfect balanced drink.
Because that idea would mean that what we as bartenders do, or what I do as a bartender, is just what I think the other person is going to like.
Mm.
Which essentially is balancing it. It's a balancing act to match somebody else's palate.
Mm.
And that usually comes with asking the questions before I make something for them. And I tend to stick to the classic cocktails.
Mm-hmm.
So a martini or a Manhattan, those old school cocktails that are still around that most cocktail bartenders will have as a backlog in their own head,
mm-hmm.
and use as a template to create new things.
Mm.
So they'll tweak ingredients, they'll change things in very slight or subtle ways, or they might change the spirit completely by adding something to it. Maybe a martini becomes a basil martini by introducing basil into the bottle,
like a basil infused.
Yeah. So there are different ways of then looking at the infusion.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do one way is just to put the basil straight in the bottle,
mm-hmm.
and leave it sit for a couple of days, and that's one way of doing it.
So this is literally, so to explain infusion, so what we're talking about now is infusion.
Yeah.
It's literally putting another product inside the liquid, inside the alcohol, and you can either leave it
there,
time,
or you can put it into a blender,
mm-hmm.
And blend it, which it's all essentially the same thing. You're taking the flavor from one thing and putting it into another thing. Mm-hmm. So a basil infused gin is taking the flavor of your basil and putting it into the gin to make it more basil-y.
Yeah.
Essentially. So if there's basil, if there's something like that in the gin already, and you want to boost that flavor again,
mm-hmm.
rather than just putting the basil as a garnish, you put the basil in the bottle or in the blender, blend it, and then strain it out, and you usually end up with this brilliant green color, which is kind of cool. But there's another way that has been spoken of that's called nitromuddling.
Okay.
Where essentially you just put a little bit of liquid nitrogen on your herbs,
mm-hmm.
And then crush them up, then cover them with your spirit and your acid or whatever else you're adding to it, and then you can strain it out. And what happens when you freeze it with liquid nitrogen is it stops that enzymatic browning, so the color is brighter, the flavor is fresher,
right?
And as it melts back into your spirit, you get these very, very fresh, untainted flavors. Mm-hmm. Normally what bartenders do to flavor syrups is cook them, because it's the easiest way that we know of to impart flavor quicker. Heat's used as the catalyst to draw flavor out. But what it also does is make the flavor different.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, that's the other side of cooking, is you're essentially changing the base element of the meal to be something else to pair with it. Whereas Japanese cooking's a little bit different on that side, is they like to stay as close to the fresh ingredients as they can, as opposed to Western cooking, where we cover things with sauces and we stew things, or we've cooked things for longer periods of time or under pressure.
On cooking, I watched a great documentary called Cooked. I don't know if you've seen this. It's on Netflix. Amazing documentary, and it talks about each episode is on a different element. So I think it's on earth, fire, water, and air.
I think I have.
Incredible documentary.
Yeah.
Really, really awesome. I think his name's Pollard. Michael Pollard. I think Pollard. I think his name is. I'll put a link to that in the episode in the description as well. But I'll find the name of that. But so we've talked there a little bit about the Cocktail Refinery and the website you're building and what you see for it.
Mm-hmm.
When are you looking at launching things?
So the first of July will be a very, very soft launch. I'm looking really to have everything up and running and very, very functional by January next year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a close project, I guess. It's not.
That's still pretty soon in the grand scheme.
It's in the grand scheme. It is fairly soon. But there's still more research that I want to have done before everything goes live,
mm-hmm.
so I can answer the questions as they come in.
Mm.
Because if I don't know, I'd like to know the answers to questions before I get the questions.
Mm.
As everybody would.
From the people who have the really hard questions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Having those hard questions. So there's a couple of resources that I go to quite often. One is called Kymos. I think it's kymos.org, so it's KHYMOS. That's more to do with cooking, and it's about flavor pairing. It goes into a lot of things like pairing flavors based on their aromatic compounds. So they're volatile aromats that come from things. So
what was that volatile aromat?
Volatile aromatics. So they're the compounds that make things smell like what they smell like. So raspberries is ethyl formate is the name of the chemical structure, and that's also found in rum. In white rums, specifically one brand that I'd rather not.
That's okay, no problem.
Not done by,
we won't talk about
by
that,
brands, but very famous brand, clear white rum.
Yep.
Ethyl formate's actually found in that as well in a trace element.
Yep.
So pairing raspberries with that rum works well.
Right.
Pork and jasmine actually share an aromatic compound.
So combining these products that have those same aromatic compounds.
And finding strange pairings, chocolate and caviar, pork and jasmine, things like that. Finding them that they have a similarity.
Crazy. What makes that similarity?
I actually have no idea. I think it's something that's naturally found in the product. It might change through cooking as well, because things will happen during cooking and change the structures. So that's an interesting bit. And the other one I think is Harvard University do a public lecture series called The Chemistry of Cooking and Soft Matter Science. And that's a really good one. They talk a lot about hydrocolloids, which is something I touched on earlier with gels and gelatin and gallon. There's a whole bunch of things that you can change the viscosity and the texture of things. They look a lot at texture. And
that was the chemistry of cooking and soft matter science. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I'll put a link to these in the description for the episode.
Yep.
But look, the last thing I wanted to ask you, because I wanted to ask you about your resources. Oh, did you find that book that you mentioned there before?
I did. It's called Liquid Intelligence by David Arnold.
Awesome. Liquid Intelligence. I've heard a lot of people talk about this book.
Brilliant book.
There are some great resources on bartending and cooking, some amazing books that I'm going to share as the podcast goes on as well. We get some more people on the podcast recommending some resources for us.
Yep.
But the last question I want to ask actually is, what's your creative process?
I have two, and and they usually follow each other. It just depends on which way they go around. I will usually find an idea that has nothing to do with bartending.
Mhm.
That something different, art, for example.
Mhm.
Let's go with music,
Mhm.
because there's a one that I've done a little bit more with. Taking music and finding a way of making that into a cocktail.
Mm. Mm.
So, can I take Beethoven's Fifth and take the musical notes and change them into cocktail elements
Mm.
to make a cocktail based on Beethoven's Fifth?
So how do you do that? How do you?
Well, that's the hard part, is then going through and finding flavors that pair with the memory of what I have of music.
Ah, cool. Okay.
And
Cool.
then I use a like a spider's web or a mind map.
Mhm.
Generally, it's the same process that Alinea and the Avery do in America.
Mhm.
One's a restaurant, the other one is essentially a cocktail restaurant,
Mhm.
where they start off with the hero
Mhm.
and then branch out and pair things from that to each other. So
Mm.
when all three elements or all four elements actually share something, then they all get put together, and
What were those four elements?
so things like, if you were to make a new cocktail based on rum, if you've got a light white rum, you get raspberry flavors out of it, so that would become its own little
Mhm.
side piece. So raspberries are a tart flavor that you might want to soften out, so
Mhm.
you can get like the sweetest spices that come from it. So you get a little bit of cinnamon, you might get a little bit of nutmeg out of it, you might get a bit of star anise
Mhm.
out of that. So cinnamon and raspberries go well together. So you
Mm.
could do a cinnamon syrup with puree of raspberries and the rum, because they all share
Mm.
a link.
So it's thinking about those. So when you talk about it, I'm just trying to explain it in a different way
Mhm.
from what I'm taking away. Is so you think about the technical nature, applying this abstract thought, and taking the technical nature of the medium that you use.
Yeah.
Knowing what pairs with what, the flavors, even that in an abstract way, the memories that you have.
Absolutely.
So you might listen. So maybe when you were young, you listened to, or younger, not too young, listening to Beethoven's, Fifth
Beethoven's
Symphony.
Fifth, yep.
Fifth. Maybe you were drinking whiskey, and so you go, "Oh, I think of whiskey when I think of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony."
I think
Is that what you're talking about?
It is very similar, but I'm talking about even before that. I wasn't drinking whiskey per se. I'm taking it from hearing Beethoven's Fifth. That ba 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 ba
Mm-hmm.
ba 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 ba. That was actually, my mum used to use that when we would go out shopping. So I could go and do my own thing, and she would whistle Beethoven's Fifth to find me, and I would whistle back, so we would know where we
Yeah.
were. So I remember that from supermarkets. Supermarkets, I remember having those candied raspberries.
Yeah.
Those candied raspberries. I actually ended up stealing a handful of candied raspberries when I was about 5. That's neither here nor there. But I also remember other things from the supermarket, like Big Red, which is a cinnamon flavored chewing gum.
Yeah.
The chewing gum flavor probably doesn't go well with everything else, but I know that the cinnamon and raspberries will.
So it's
taking
about
those other
letting that
memories,
evolve and flow, and you think of one thing and it leads to another thing, leads to another thing, leads to another thing. It's about taste, flavor.
absolutely,
And then creating
experience,
that.
memory,
Yeah, love
aromatics, sounds. The music that might have been playing, as well as
In the shopping
in the
centre.
shopping centre at the same
Great.
time.
Yeah.
What kind of shoes was I wearing? Was it a squeaky floor? Does that have an effect on how I would make the cocktail? So taking it a very, very broad spectrum and trying to pick out the pieces that are not necessarily going to be easy to use in the the creation of a drink, but will have an effect that has a story as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, like a raspberry daiquiri to me would makes me think of Beethoven's Fifth.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing all that.
Sorry.
JD, it's been a whole bunch of different topics we talked about.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
No worries at all. And guys at home, if you'd love to subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, we're going to be continuing these episodes of the Hospopreneurs podcast, and I would love for you to get involved. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything you'd like to hear on the show, please email me at hospopreneurs@gmail.com. And follow us on Instagram, and that's at Hospopreneurs is the handle. So thanks for joining us, and look forward to having a chat with you soon. Cheers.